Welcome to this episode of the weekly News Roundup. We move first to Baku in Kazakhstan, where the COP29 or United Nations Climate Change Conference took place. The United Nations Climate Change Conferences, or the COPs, take place every year and are the world's only multilateral decision-making forum on climate change that brings together almost every country on Earth. The recently concluded COP29 in Baku has left many nations, particularly of the global south, dissatisfied, with many parties condemning the proposed climate funds from developed nations as insufficient for the needs of developing countries. The rich nations have pledged to mobilize $300 billion annually by 2035, which is triple the current funding levels, but still far short of the $1.3 trillion that the developing world needs and had hoped for. Though $300 billion may sound great on paper, all these funds are not grants but given as loans, which will further strain the developing world's fragile economies. All the previous funding, often provided as high-interest loans, has already burdened low-income nations with mounting debt. COP29 did have some positives though. After nearly a decade of discussions, countries reached a key agreement on finalizing the rules for carbon trading under Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. This sets up a global carbon market, allowing nations to trade carbon credits and work together to reduce emissions more efficiently. We bring you this report.
Dubbed the Finance COP, the climate conference in Baku, Azerbaijan was expected to secure substantial funding to help developing nations transition away from fossil fuels, as promised at last year's COP28. However, the conference fell short with only $300 billion annually pledged by 2035, far below the $1.3 trillion requested. Many of the least developed countries or LDCs even walked out of the hall in protest, saying, "We are outraged and deeply hurt by the outcome of COP29. Once again, the countries most responsible for the climate crisis have failed us. This is not just a failure, it's a betrayal." India's delegate Chalini Raina voiced strong discontent, saying it was a paltry sum. She criticized the agreement as being little more than an optical illusion, emphasizing that it fell far short of addressing the magnitude of the climate crisis. These countries are already grappling with severe climate-induced challenges like drought, food shortages, water scarcity, and displacement, which cost them 5 to 10% of their GDP annually. To address these challenges effectively, they have proposed that over 50% of the total climate finance from developed nations be provided as grants, ensuring equitable and sustainable support. We now come to the question of why developed nations have to fund developing nations. The world's poorest and least developed nations, despite contributing the least to climate change, suffer the most from its effects, facing devastating floods, extreme heat waves, and other climate-related disasters. In contrast, the USA and China, the largest greenhouse gas emitters, are responsible for 27% and 11% of global emissions, respectively. The environmental damage caused by these emissions disproportionately impacts poor nations that lack the resources to manage the consequences. To address this imbalance, COP27 introduced the idea of a loss and damage fund, where wealthy nations responsible for the climate crisis would provide financial support to the vulnerable countries. Developing nations have called for a share of this wealth to reduce emissions, adapt to climate impacts, and recover from ongoing disasters, highlighting the need for fairness in addressing the global climate crisis. At stake in Baku was the money needed to help poor countries shift to a low-carbon economy and adapt their infrastructure to the impacts of extreme weather. About $1.3 trillion a year will be needed by 2035 for countries to achieve this, and for the world to stay within the 1.5 degrees Celsius climate threshold, shorthand for global average surface warming of 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial temperatures. That's the level of warming that the countries who signed the Paris Agreement have agreed to try to stay below. But at the end of the day, the developed countries agreed to give $300 billion a year in climate finance to developing countries by 2035, an outcome that left many global South nations bitterly disappointed. After all the divisions revealed over the past fortnight, the irony is that nearly every country gathered in Baku acknowledged that climate finance for the poor world was good for the whole planet. As Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, put it, "The world must pay up or humanity will pay the price. Climate finance is not charity, it's an investment."
We move now to Nicaragua in South America, where the Nicaraguan parliament, dominated by the ruling Sandinista Front, approved a constitutional reform that hands more power to President Daniel Ortega as well as the Central American nations' police and military. The reform increases the president's control over the media, extends the presidential term to 6 years from 5, and changes the roles of vice president and president to those of co-presidents. Vice President Rosario Murillo, who is Daniel Ortega's wife, will now become his co-president. The two have been married since 2005, and she was made vice president in 2017. Ortega has cracked down on dissent over recent years. More than 200 political prisoners were freed early last year and expelled to the United States, including 5 former presidential hopefuls who had been jailed after seeking to challenge the increasingly authoritarian Ortega in a 2021 election. Under the new reform, the co-presidents will have control over the legislature, judiciary, and electoral public administration and oversight bodies, as well as autonomous entities. We bring you this report.
Ortega's government has targeted critics, shutting down more than 5,000 NGOs since 2018. Mass protests in the United Nations estimates more than 300 people died. Thousands of Nicaraguans have fled into exile, and the regime is under US and EU sanctions. Most independent and opposition media now operate from abroad. The ex-guerrilla had first served as president from 1985 to 1990, returning to power in 2007. Nicaragua has jailed hundreds of opponents, real and perceived, since then. The constitutional amendment stipulates that traitors to the homeland can be stripped of their citizenship, as the Ortega government has already done with hundreds of politicians, journalists, intellectuals, and activists, among others perceived as critical. Ortega and Murillo accused the church, journalists, and NGOs of having supported an attempted coup d'etat, as they described the 2018 protests. The head of the legislature, Gustavo Porras, confirmed during Friday's session that the reform would be voted on and approved for a second time on January 10, following Nicaraguan law that says constitutional changes must be approved in 2 legislative periods. Porras brushed off criticism of the reform, calling them a stupid way of carrying out opposition. The change also allows for stricter control over the media and the church, so they are not subject to foreign interests. And it gives the co-presidents the power to coordinate all legislative, judicial, electoral control and supervisory bodies, regional and municipal, which were formerly independent under the Constitution. A Nicaraguan analyst for the Inter-American Dialogue said the reform guarantees the presidential succession of Murillo and Peo's son, Laureano Ortega. The Geneva-based UN Human Rights Office, in its annual report on Nicaragua, warned in September of a serious deterioration in human rights under Ortega. The revised constitution will define Nicaragua as a revolutionary and socialist state and include the red and black flag of the FSLN, a guerrilla group turned political party that overthrew the US-backed dictator Anastasio Somoza in 1979, among its national symbols. Dora Maria Telles, a former comrade in the arms of Ortega turned critic, told AFP from exile in the United States, "Everything in the reform is what has actually been happening in Nicaragua, a de facto dictatorship. The reform also increases the power of the country's military and police and gives the state more control over the media and church. It stipulates that traitors to the homeland can be stripped of their citizenship, which Ortega has already done in practice. The amendment must be approved a second time in February before it becomes effective. UN High Commissioner for Human Rights Volker Turk said the changes marked a concerning further erosion of checks and balances on executive power. If adopted, these changes will sound the death knell for fundamental freedoms and rule of law in Nicaragua, he said in a statement.
In a significant demonstration of India's growing military prowess, the Defense Research and Development Organization, the DRDO, successfully flight tested the country's first long-range hypersonic missile from Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam Island off the coast of Odisha. At present, only a few countries like the United States, Russia and China have hypersonic missiles. These missiles can travel at speeds exceeding Mach 5, which is 5 times the speed of sound, or roughly around 6,200 kilometers per hour. With such extreme speed, maneuverability, and the ability to fly at lower altitudes than traditional ballistic missiles, hypersonic missiles are harder to detect and intercept. Also, it was the first time the DRDO conducted the experimental trial of an indigenously designed and developed missile after sunset. We bring you this report.
The test was conducted in the presence of senior scientists and officers of the armed forces. The government statement said that the missile was deployed in multiple domains using different range systems. Flight data confirmed the impact of the missile with a high degree of accuracy. Defense Minister Rajnath Singh took to social media to hail the test, calling it a major milestone and significant achievement. He also added that the historic achievement has put India in the group of select nations having capabilities of advanced military technologies, while congratulating the DRDO and the armed forces. Designed for the armed forces, the missile can carry payloads for over 1,500 kilometers. Others like the RDO and several industry partners have also contributed to the development of the missile. In a significant development for India's nuclear weapons program, the country has successfully tested the K4, a long-range submarine-launched ballistic missile. This was not the first test of the missile, but it was the first from an operational nuclear submarine, the INS Arigat. With a range of 3,500 kilometers, the K4 represents a significant advancement in India's strategic defense. The test demonstrates India's ability to launch a strategic weapon from deep beneath the ocean, overcoming technological, engineering, and operational challenges. Submarine-launched ballistic missiles are said to be the most critical part of the nuclear triad. A nuclear triad involves nuclear attack capability from launch platforms based on land, sea, and air. Nuclear triads eliminate an enemy's ability to destroy a nation's nuclear force in a first strike attack. This gives the country an ability to launch a second strike and hence increases nuclear deterrence. The details are being analyzed, and the top military and political brass would be briefed by officials concerned on the exact details after complete analysis, defense sources said.
We move now to the east coast of India, where Cyclone Fenjar triggered heavy rainfall in North Tamil Nadu and Puducherry, with the Union Territory recording 48.4 centimeters of rain over 24 hours on December 1st. According to the Indian Meteorological Department, the IMD, the depression over north coastal Tamil Nadu and Puducherry is likely to move westwards very slowly and weaken gradually into a depression over North Tamil Nadu. The cyclonic storm disrupted normal life, restricted movement of transport services, including airports and bus stands. Till now, 12 people have died in the aftermath of Cyclone Fenjar. The weather system, which is traveling westward slowly, pounded various districts in its path and left a trail of floods. The Regional Meteorological Center of Chennai has issued a yellow alert indicating the possibility of heavy rainfall of up to 11 centimeters in interior and western Ghat districts, including the Nilgiris, Krishnagiri, Tirupur, Erode, Theni, and Madurai districts. Meanwhile, 7 people, including 5 children, were trapped under the ground in a landslide in Tiruvannamalai, according to a press release. The deceased have been identified as Rajkumar and his family. The family was residing on 11th Street in VOC Nagar. Chief Minister M.K. Stalin has announced Rs 5 lakh ex gratia for the families of the 7 who lost their lives in the landslide due to heavy downpour in Tiruvannamalai district. We bring you this report.
Cyclone Fenjal has wreaked unprecedented havoc across 14 districts of Tamil Nadu, affecting 1.5 crore people, inundating 2.11 lakh hectares of farmland and damaging critical infrastructure. Tamil Nadu Chief Minister M.K. Stalin posted on X, "Given the magnitude of destruction, I urge Honorable Prime Minister Narendra Modi to release Rs 2,000 crore from the NDRF immediately to aid emergency restoration and rehabilitation efforts." The aftereffects of the cyclone are also expected to bring heavy rainfall to some districts of Tamil Nadu. Speaking about the deceased family of Rajkumar that was completely destroyed in the landslide that occurred due to the landslide in Tiruvannamalai, CM M.K. Stalin said in a press release, "I express my deepest condolences and sympathy to the families of those who died in this accident and have ordered that each of the families of the deceased be provided with Rs 5 lakhs each from the Chief Minister's General Relief Fund." The incident occurred around 4 in the afternoon when Rajkumar came to know that a tree had fallen on his house. A huge rock rolled down from the mountain and fell on the top of his house, adding that the National Disaster Response Force (NDRF) was informed about the incident and 39 soldiers engaged in the rescue operations. Panic has gripped the residents near the lower slopes of Annamalayar Hill in Tiruvannamalai district, Tamil Nadu, after heavy rains triggered multiple landslides, killing 7 members of the family on Sunday evening. The disaster, brought on by the impact of Cyclone Fenjal, has left locals fearing for their lives and reluctant to return to their homes. The first landslide occurred around 4 p.m. on Sunday at VOC Nagar 11th Street, where Rajkumar, his wife Meena, their 2 children, and 3 children of Rajkumar's brother-in-law were trapped under debris as rocks and mud crashed down from the hillock. Surya, the brother of the 3 children, recounted the tragic incident. "I saw rocks tumbling down and shouted to alert my siblings and aunt. They ran inside the house for safety, but a tree fell on the house, followed by debris from the landslide. I could only sit in one corner and cry," he said, devastated by the loss. Later that night, residents near VOC Nagar heard loud noises and witnessed more mudsliding down the hill. Fearing for their safety, many abandoned their homes, leaving behind their belongings, and sought refuge at a nearby government school. The situation worsened on Monday with 2 additional minor landslides reported in the same area. While no further damage was reported, the fear among residents remains palpable. India Meteorological Department (IMD) has issued a heavy rain alert for several parts of South India, including North Interior Tamil Nadu, Kerala, and Karnataka.
In October, U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, the ICE, sent a chartered flight carrying Indian nationals back home, marking a growing trend in deportations to India. This was one of multiple large-scale removal flights carried out this year, each typically carrying more than 100 passengers. The flights were returning groups of Indian migrants who did not establish a legal basis to remain in the United States. According to US officials, the latest flight carrying adult men and women was routed to Punjab, close to many deportees' places of origin. No precise breakdown of hometowns was provided. In the US fiscal year 2024, which ended in September, more than 1,000 Indian nationals had been repatriated by charter and commercial flights, according to Royce Bernstein Murray, Assistant Secretary at the US Department of Homeland Security. As the US ramps up repatriations of Indian nationals, concerns grow about how President-elect Donald Trump's immigration policies will affect them. Trump has already promised the biggest deportation of migrants in history. Since October 2020, US Customs and Border Protection, the CPB, officials have detained nearly 170,000 Indian migrants attempting unauthorized crossings at both the northern and southern land borders. Though smaller than the numbers from Latin America and the Caribbean, Indian nationals represent the largest group of migrants from outside the Western Hemisphere encountered by the CBB in the past 4 years. We bring you this report.
As of 2022, an estimated 725,000 undocumented Indian immigrants were in the US, making them the third largest group after those from Mexico and El Salvador. According to new data from the Pew Research Center, unauthorized immigrants in all make up 3% of US total population and 22% of the foreign-born population. There are some identifiable trends that can be seen in this migration according to experts. For one, the migrants are not from the lowest economic strata, but they cannot secure tourist or student visas to the US, often due to lower education or English proficiency. Instead, they rely on agencies charging up to $100,000 approximately 84,50,000 rupees, sometimes using long and arduous routes designed to dodge border controls. To afford this, many self-farms or take-out loans. Not surprisingly, data from the US immigration courts in 2024 reveals that the majority of Indian migrants were male, aged between 18 to 34. Canada on the northern border has become a more accessible entry point for Indians with a visitor visa processing time of 76 days, compared to up to a year for a US visa in India. Earlier, most irregular Indian migrants entered the Americas through the busier southern border with Mexico via El Salvador or Nicaragua, both of which facilitated migration. Until November last year, Indian nationals enjoyed visa-free travel to El Salvador. The US-Canada border is also longer and less guarded than the US-Mexico border. And while it is not necessarily safer, criminal groups do not have the same presence there as they do along the route from South and Central America. Researchers found a shift in the family demographics of Indian nationals at the borders. More families are trying to cross the border. In 2021, single adults were overwhelmingly detained at both borders. Now, family units make up 16 to 18% of the detentions at both borders. Many experts say that Indians are trying to cross into the US in larger numbers because of more economic opportunities and more ability to enter the informal economies in the US cities, especially the large ones like New York or Boston. Things are likely to become more difficult soon. Veteran immigration official Tom Homan, who will be in charge of the country's borders following Trump's inauguration in January, has said that the northern border with Canada is a priority because illegal migration in the area is a huge national security issue. This has also sometimes led to tragic consequences. In January 2022, an Indian family of 4, part of a group of 11 people from Gujarat, froze to death just 12 meters from the border in Canada while attempting to enter the US. The victims, 39-year-old Jagdish Patel, his wife Vaishali Ben, who was in her mid-30s, their 11-year-old daughter Vihangi, and 3-year-old son Dharmik were found frozen to death near Emerson town of Manitoba province by Canadian authorities on January 19, 2022, while trying to cross the border into Minnesota. The family was originally from Dingucha village in Gujarat's Gandhinagar district. Patel and his wife were reportedly school teachers and their family was fairly well off by local standards. The Patels were part of an 11-member group of undocumented Indian migrants who had paid smugglers to navigate their illegal entry into the US. They lost their way in the blizzard and got separated from the rest of the group. The temperature was -35 degrees below freezing. The young family had probably never experienced temperatures that low before. When the Canadian authorities found them in a field just north of the border, all 4 of them were found huddled together, frozen in the snow. The authorities filed a case of human smuggling, and after 2 years of investigations, 2 men, Harsh Kumar Patel, not related to Jagdish Patel, an experienced smuggler nicknamed Dirty Harry, and Steve Shand, the driver recently recruited by Mr. Patel at a casino near their Florida homes, were arrested. The 2 men, whose trial is scheduled to start, are accused of being part of a sophisticated human smuggling operation, feeding a fast-growing population of Indians living illegally in the US. Both have pleaded not guilty. The dreams driving thousands of desperate Indians to seek a better life in the US are unlikely to fade, even as the road ahead becomes more perilous.
Thanks so much for watching this episode. Until we meet next time, stay blessed.